Welcome to another MedTech Gurus podcast, where we meet and discuss trending and educational topics that are important to today's medical technology sales and marketing professionals. Now, it doesn't matter if you're new to the space or if you're a seasoned medical sales and marketing professional. You all have come to the right place. You see, the medical technology world is ever-changing, and MedTech Gurus will help you stay up to date by interviewing experts and opinion leaders. Now, we call them gurus, and they will bring you information, techniques, and strategies that are sure to help you enhance your knowledge and help you bring value to your customers and your company. Now, I'm Sylvester Harris, and I'm pleased to introduce your host for MedTech Gurus, Mr. Tom Hickey.
Hey, what's going on up there, Gurus? This is Tom Hickey, your host of MedTech Gurus, and welcome to episode number 277. Tim Tobin, CEO of Planatome, is our guru in this episode. Planatome is bringing groundbreaking innovation in reshaping surgical outcomes. Discover how nanopolished surgical blades are reducing hypertrophic scarring and transforming patient recovery. Tim shares insights from Planatome's journey, from the challenges of commercialization to exciting breakthroughs in healing technology. Join us as we explore the future of surgical precision and the societal impact of these cutting-edge advancements. Stay tuned for an inspiring conversation with a true MedTech visionary. But before we get into the episode, let's thank our sponsor, Accelerant Consulting. Gurus, the U.S. healthcare delivery system is focused on value more than ever. We've all witnessed how value analysis teams have become increasingly influential in product decision-making. Here's the problem. How do you create a value message which clearly explains the quantitative and qualitative value that distinguishes your product from the competition? Let's face it, if the value analysis team has to come back and ask questions, that can set you back months before you get back on their agenda. How much would that cost you? Let the team at Accelerant Consulting help. They can review or even design your value analysis documents, the result being having a complete document that resonates with the professionals on these teams. Reach out to the experts at Accelerant Consulting today. Learn more at accelerantconsulting.com. That's EXCELERANT consulting.com and do it today. Okay, Gurus, here it comes. Episode number 277. And remember, if you like what you hear, please subscribe, leave a review, and most importantly, tell a friend. Welcome, MedTech Gurus. Today, as I mentioned in the introduction, we have an amazing guest with us. Tim Tobin, Vice President of Commercial Operations at Planatome, is joining us. Planatome is revolutionizing post-surgical outcomes with its innovative nanopolished surgical blades that significantly reduce hypertrophic scarring. Tim brings years of experience in medical device commercialization and strategic operations, making him a key figure in advancing surgical technology. Tim has a Bachelor of Science in Applied Physics and Mathematics from SUNY University and a Master's of Engineering in Microelectronic Manufacturing from the Rochester Institute of Technology. Hey, Tim, are you ready to be our guru today?
Absolutely. I'm excited for it.
Oh, that's great. We're excited to have you. So tell us something fun or interesting about yourself or your family so we can get to know you a little better.
Sure, absolutely. So I grew up in Rochester, New York, the middle child of three. So it probably means I was the problem child. I'm not sure, but it certainly means I didn't like the rules, right? Which is thus into the entrepreneurial world and trying to change things. So albeit very late in life, and I think my family might have given up on me, I had my first child born a few years ago when I was 52. So I've started late in life, but man, that is a joy I had no idea was possible.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You know, parenthood is an interesting challenge. I was just with my youngest son of 28 years old the other day, and it was just we had a blast. So it's always each phase is better than the last, I think.
That's fantastic. I love it.
So, Tim, looking at Planatome, you've really developed a fascinating innovation in surgical blades. And I wanted to kick us off here, if you can walk us through the story Planatome was founded, and then what inspired the development of these nano-polished blades. Can you help us out with that?
Sure, absolutely. So my background, as you said, was in the semiconductor field. My business partner Steve and I started a company in the semiconductor industry back in October of 1998. There's about 15 processes that you use when you make a chip. One of them is where we polish the surface of the chip so it's literally almost perfectly molecularly smooth, so we can layer on more layers of the transistors. So we launched the first ever operation dedicated to developing those processes for big name companies like Intel and Samsung and Texas Instruments and Apple, Facebook, you name it. We're doing well. Grew leveled off, and our CFO one day during strategy session said, "Hey, here we are, this small $25-30 million company doing business with big name company." He said, "Where else can we use this technology? I mean, we have the biggest portfolio of these processes in the entire world." So we said, "That's a great question." And we started looking. We looked at 3 different industries: medical, aerospace, defense, and automotive. And medical is the one we found the first application for, which we thought was just really cool and could be very much game changing. So we launched a subsidiary, and we've actually eventually sold the semiconductor side of the business almost exactly 2 years ago to a public company here in town, and now full time on the medical device on Planatome, which we spun out of the original parent company a few years ago.
Oh, that's a very cool development, and it's interesting that you've chosen to focus on that. I suspect, and we'll get into that story later, but it really has helped you kind of just focus on the industry and the development of the surgical application, correct?
Very, very much so. And our first product that we picked within the medical, because we have a patent that covers all surgical cutting instruments, our first patent that's granted, was the scalpel blade, because the blade was made and it was invented in 1915, and nothing has changed since then. They just take a stainless steel blank and they grind it up to a point. So, we said, well, couldn't that be better if we make it incredibly, incredibly smooth? And that was really the first product we looked at. Now we've got a bunch of different ones, which I'm sure we'll get into as we go along here.
Yeah. So when I was doing my research in your company, I noted hypertrophic scarring is really a significant issue. And if I've got this right, it affects something like 40% of post-surgical patients, costing like $4 billion plus annually in the U.S. alone. So how does the nanopolished blade that you're talking about here, how does that technology work to reduce that scarring and make it different from that conventional blade you're just talking about?
Sure. No, that's a great question. So, 40%. And for some people, eventually that hypertrophic scar will go away, after maybe a year, 2 years. For other people, it stays forever. And a hypertrophic scar is like a bumped up, raised, kind of discolored scar. Sometimes they can, and it's from extra collagen deposition. And sometimes that hypertrophic scar can actually eventually turn into a keloid, which is the collagen that, that keeps growing out and out and out beyond the wound's boundaries. So conceptually what we do is it's really very simple and highly intuitive. Whether you're a medical professional or not a medical professional, everybody gets it right away. So we take, and hopefully you can see this picture, we take a blade that is made, like I said, by taking diamond grit wheels. And so you can see that's what the blade looks like.
Right.
That's doing the cutting. This one right here is the side profile. And this line that goes right across there, that's the actual line that's doing the cutting. As you can imagine, that would, something that looks a lot like a saw, if it's starting to cut, it's sawing, it's tearing and ripping. So what we do is and that's not the worst blade in the world. That's the number 1 blade in the world. So we actually buy it from them and polish it. And that's what our blade looks like when we're done. So what it does is it changes the cutting mechanism from a sawing and tearing, to just a nice, clean, smooth incision. And you can think of it like, right, if you grab a serrated bread knife out of your kitchen, you cut your hand, it's going to be mangled, but you get a little paper cut. You got cut, but it heals much faster and it's much less wound.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. So, in further into my research, I noticed noted the study conducted by your team that showed an 86% reduction in the hypertrophic scarring with only like under a 2% occurrence rate compared to like 12.5% for conventional blades. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that study design and some of the key takeaways for surgeons and healthcare providers.
Sure.
Help us out with that.
Sure, absolutely. So when we first launched the blade, there were a bunch of things we wanted to do, prototyping it, making sure it was right for the industry. And one of the plastic surgeons that we work with, we went largely to plastic surgeons at first because they're usually very early adopters of technology. And one of the ones we worked with, his name is Dr. Frank Aguglio, Mayo trained plastic surgeon. He's in El Paso, and he's been using our blade for over 3 years now. And one of the things that he observed earlier this past year, I almost said this year, but I forgot we're in the new year now. This past year, he observed, he said, I'll bet my incidence of adverse scarring, hypertrophic scarring, keloiding has gone down. And he just kind of speculated about 90% compared to when he used the conventional blade. Because with that reduced trauma incision, you get much less collagen that's needed to heal that wound, so less inflammation. And so we did a retrospective study, the 3 years that he's been using our blade versus the 3 years prior. And we wanted to make sure that the patient populations were identical. So there was really no, you couldn't say any of the differences came from something other than that. So they were all, we had 57 face and neck lift patients over the 3-year period with the conventional blade versus 57 face and neck lift patients over a 3-year period with the Planatome blade. And then we checked to make sure that relative to ethnicity, age, gender, smoking, and comorbidities, that the populations were the same too, which they were statistically the same across the board. And what we found was that only one of the 57 that had the Planatome blade turned into a hypertrophic scar, where 7 of the 57 for the conventional blade had the hypertrophic scarring. So there's a drastic difference. And usually, in the medical and other industries too, but medical, if you get about 80% confidence level, it's pretty significant. Gold standard is 95%. This was at the 97% confidence interval. So it's very strong data. Very, very strong data.
Yeah, that's outstanding. And I might put you on the spot a little bit, but when you think plastic surgery, you're thinking, skin, right? That initial incision around the skin. But I'm wondering if it's got an impact, for some of the adjacent structures as well. Are you seeing, have you looked at like muscle tissue and some of those types of structures for healing there?
Yeah, that's sort of question, actually. We're starting some of the work into that. We have a plastic surgeon we just started speaking with, who just utilized the blades very recently. And he said what he believes is happening is that for those structures, that the Planatome blade preserves the microcellular relationship between the epidermis and the deep dermis. So when you get into muscles too, you can see very visibly the healing difference from the Planatome blade versus the conventional blade on the surface of the skin, because it's just a much smoother incision. So you've got to know intuitively that same type of healing would go down deeper if you're using the Planatome blade to cut into muscle and other things like that. But that's what he believes is preserving the microcellular relationship between it. And we're in the process of putting together some studies to experiment with that and get some data.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and it'll be interesting to see what those outcomes look like. But to kind of build on the story, then, I've been in the surgery business for a long time, and I realize that minimizing surgical trauma is really critical and crucial for improving patient outcomes, right? And especially when I'm thinking about some of the head and neck surgeries that we see from time to time. Can you give us a little more detail about the precision of the Planatome blade and how it contributes to less tissue trauma and better healing? Can you take us a little deeper there?
Sure. So first I'll talk about the precision of the blade, but then, again, like I said, it's very intuitive as to why that is better. I'll give you some of the physiological details behind that. But if you look at the precision of the blade, if you were to measure the surface roughness of a conventional blade, the peak to valley, you're in the 5,000 to 50,000 nanometer range. Mm-hmm. So we take a blade like that, and after we're done polishing it, we're between the 5 and 20 nanometers, not 5,000 and 20,000. So it is between 1,000 and 10,000 times more precise. So all of those serrations don't grab and snag. So what happens is, when you make a cut, of course, you're going to have trauma that's induced. However much trauma you induce, the body has to then heal that, right? So you induce trauma, then you have an inflammatory response, proliferative response, and then maturation, the three kind of main phases after hemostasis. So if you do less trauma to begin with, you have less that you need to do to heal it. And presumably then, and so all of our preclinical data shows it's much stronger too. So what happens is with that less trauma, we've shown up at the University of Chicago, they showed 50 to 60% less collagen deposition, an 8x reduction in TGF beta, and a 2.5x reduction in macrophage densities, all of which indicate how much trauma, thus how much healing needs to be done. So when we have much less trauma, much less healing needs to be done, much faster wound healing. One of the things that they also looked up there at the University of Chicago was the healing time. So they took side-by-side incisions in guinea pigs, and they looked at a traditional blade or a conventional blade versus the Planatome blade. The Planatome blade, 3 days after incision, was 90% wound closure. The conventional blade was 10% wound closure.
Wow.
And that's phenomenal. Yeah, it's phenomenal. That's 3 days afterwards. So much faster healing, much less that needs to be done. And it translates into scarring. And the one thing I want to note, actually just earlier last year, about this time last year, we also had researchers over at the Asan Medical Center, which is the 5th largest hospital in the entire world, JP Hung and JW Choi. They believed that this same type of benefit would translate to diabetic wound healing, and specifically to diabetic foot ulcers, which have an unbelievably high mortality rate. The 5-year mortality rate, if you have a diabetic foot ulcer, is the same as all-cause cancer. I was shocked when I saw those statistics.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds like you got your work cut out for you in some of those areas for sure.
And they did show that, by the way, that the Planatome blade, because they did a study with diabetic and non-diabetic rats, and they showed that the Planatome blade with the diabetic rat level set the healing in every one of those 3 phases: inflammation, proliferation, and maturation, compared to a healthy rat with the conventional blade. So it's remarkable. We've got great hope and promise for that.
And that's fascinating. So Tim, I'm going to back you up just a step here, because talking to a lot of the gurus that we've talked to and others in the marketplace, in the medical industry, introducing a new product is challenging, but a new surgical instrument to the market is really no small feat. What have been some of the key challenges that you faced in getting surgeons and hospitals to adopt this technology? And then, help us out with some of the learning here. How's your team overcome some of that?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And I would really categorize the answer to that in 2 different ways, right? From a technology standpoint, but then also from a commercialization, the adoption type standpoint. So I'll take the technology first. If you look at the technology, it's very different by product. We look at, okay, if we're taking this blade and take something really rough and making it incredibly smooth, how sharp do we want to make it? With things like surgical scissors, doctors know exactly what they're doing, right? They just cut through, and they know exactly what they're doing with surgical blades too. With surgical blades, they're used to pushing down a certain amount and getting a cut of a certain depth. We struggled with how sharp do we want to make our blades feel, such that we didn't want to have a learning curve for the surgeons. So one of the things we actually had to do was work very hard at the geometry of the blades to make it so that there was no learning curve for the patients when it comes to surgical blades. And we've filed additional patents around that as well. It's a very, very novel technique that we used. But then, like with surgical scissors, they just want them to be as sharp as can be. They're just going to slide right through. So depending on the product you have, there's considerations for the surgeon that you don't have with other ones. So that's a pretty profound difference between the two. So it's a really good example of them there. Then from a commercialization standpoint, this is something I'd say, we screwed up. If I could do it in hindsight, I'd probably do something like, scissors and rongeurs, and we've done a bunch of different products now. I would probably do those first. We thought, because there's 5 billion scalpel blades used every year, and it's still the primary incision tool, right? It's the foundation. Even if you're doing a minimally invasive procedure, you first take a scalpel blade and you cut it, and then you put in, your minimally invasive, either laparoscopic or robotic tools. So we thought that would be, because it's so profound and so widespread its usage, that would be something very high on people's minds. What we didn't realize is that it had become so commoditized and just kind of dismissed. And medical personnel have so many things they have to deal with, right? So many things. And in their mind, I'm sure they're like, boy, do I want to add one more thing to my plate, right? And that's a very difficult thing to overcome. And then with hospital administrations, right? I mean, a traditional blade is 20 to 50 cents. Our blade still is not expensive relative to any procedure. We're $2, maybe $3, depending on volumes. And they're like, God, I can't increase costs on anything, even though it's maybe only $1 or $2 in any procedure. So there were a lot of learnings on the technology side, but then on the adoption side, on the approach we took, right, and how we go about commercializing this. This is ultimately a licensing opportunity for us where we're going to take our technology and we're going to go to the largest manufacturers in the world and license it and let them, they have the channels to market, right? I mean, that would be millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars probably if we were to put those processes in place to get the channel to market very widespread. But we would far rather license it and keep applying this to re-innovate and improve so many, there's hundreds of products in the surgical space that we can put this on, and we will put this on.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And sticking with that commercialization for a moment, you kind of mentioned, you wish you'd had started in that other area. Would your advice to other entrepreneurs out there be to take a little more time before you launched, or are you kind of happy that you launched when you did and now you're kind of learning how to pivot? Do you have any thoughts for us there?
Yeah, but on both sides of that, I see arguments for it. So certainly, I wish that I'd started with other products, higher value up in the food chain, like I said, this robotic surgery or even surgical scissors, just because you can get more attention from the folks there. But the learnings that we had trying to make the blade, the surgical blade, be what it is that surgeons wanted, and many different types, right? I mean, we've got OBGYNs and plastics and orthopedics, many different types of surgeons that have used it. The learnings that we had for multiple, 3 years plus 4 years, getting that right, that has allowed us to take that 3-year learning cycle and compress it so much more. Now we've put it on, where it took 3 to 4 years for the blades, it took 3 to 4 weeks for us to put it onto surgical scissors. And now we've done rongeurs, biopsy punches, curettes. So now that pace is accelerating much, much, much faster now. So, if we were going to commercialize it both ourselves, I wish we would have started on a higher value product ourselves. But since we're going to license this anyways, those learnings are fantastic for us because we can come right up the learning curve on anything very fast.
Yeah, I think now it would be helpful when you're talking to some of those licensing opportunities and they say, well, how about this other application? You've got that experience in that, you handled that learning curve, right?
Exactly. And, at this point now, it's really just a matter of, when people say, okay, as soon as you talk to a surgeon, they get it right away. They're like, oh yeah, of course, that makes sense. And then their mind goes right to, oh, well, could you put that on X, Y's, bone saws, drill bits? And that answer is yes, we can absolutely do it. It's just a matter of fixturing whatever that product is that we need to do it. And then the end effector to actually do that nanopolished process appropriately so that we keep the structure intact, but remove all the defects from it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, Tim, bringing you back to Planatome now for a moment. I've had some folks from 3M on, the podcast in the past, and one of the things that I've learned is skin is really a variable, organ, right? So you get things like ethnicities and aging young people versus older people. So it looks like the scarring disproportionately impacts individuals with darker skin tones and also the younger individuals. So can you explain to us how Planatome is addressing some of these variables and raising awareness about the benefits for nanopolished blades?
Yeah, that's very good insight there. So you're 100% correct, right? The adverse scarring of hypertrophic scars and keloids, they happen disproportionately higher the darker your skin is. So, and that was one of the things about Dr. Aguyo's study that he did. He's in El Paso. 75% of his patient population the Fitzpatrick score, which is the darkness of your skin, right? It goes 1 is the lightest and 6 is the darkest. 75% of his patient population is Fitzpatrick scores 4, 5, and 6. So this patient population is very prone to adverse scarring and keloids. So once we saw the data, we're very confident with that. We started accelerating, trying to get, our licensing discussions now. We're speaking with a number of different parties who will be able to get this out more widespread, much faster than we can do, right? They've got the channels, they've invested the money in the manufacturing, all that kind of stuff. While we're doing in parallel with that, we are speaking with some very high profile key opinion leading surgeons and other advocates that can really bring awareness, not just to surgeons, but really to, I think the more widespread is going to come as patients learn about it, because everybody understands it right away. I mean, growing up in New York, I've got a big mouth and I'm talking to everybody. So, and there is not one person I've ever explained this to, because it's so simple, especially once you look at those pictures that say, well, of course I want that to be the one that cuts me and not this. So when you bring that same type of awareness about how this will so disproportionately affect those with darker skin, when you're actually younger, right? More hormones when you're younger. So kids, and also during pregnancy, again, more hormones are going on. So you're much more prone to keloiding and hypertrophic scarring. Once that word is widespread, patients will ask their doctors and it will drive it through. It's actually the same way that like Intuitive drove the adoption of the Da Vinci robot. It was they were marketing to the patient. The patients would go in and say, hey, what about this robotic surgery? What about this robotic surgery? We're making just a small change with the scalpel blade. So compared to the big change of robotic surgery. So there's absolutely, this can be done that way. So we're in parallel doing the licensing and who can we find the advocates, and then shows exactly like yours right here.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So Tim, it sounds like this is really an exciting time for Planatome. What does the future hold for you and your team? You touched on a little bit, but where are you going from here? What do you see coming down the road?
Yeah, so in the medical space, as I said, we've started at the end of last year. We started applying this to other instruments, and we've done, I mentioned already, scissors, rongeurs, curettes, biopsy punches. We are just in the queue right now are the minimally invasive products, laparoscopic cutting tools, and in particular the robotic cutting tools. Very, very expensive. They're reused. One of the things that our blade brings about, or our polishing technology brings about, is much more durability, because those same serrations, whether it's on scissors or biopsy punches, scalpel blades, they're all the same serrations. The failure mechanism is that they either bend over and break off, or they gunk up with tissue, and that's how they stop working right. But we get rid of those serrations so that we get all the clinical benefits, the better healing. Well, by the way, pure luck, if you will, that makes the blade or the scissors or anything else last much, much longer. And that's a huge financial win for, the robotic surgery manufacturers, as well as hospitals, across the board, lowering costs eventually. So we're going to bring this to a whole host of additional medical devices, but then we'll take this same technology and eventually move it into other industries as well. We've got a whole bunch of consumer, ideas for consumer stuff or defense stuff, automotive. It's really fun because, here we are taking this, and we're just going to be a technology company now. We're not going to have to invest in the manufacturer. We don't plan ever to invest in manufacturing or commercialization. There's people that already do these things. We take stuff that's there and make it one heck of a lot better. That's fantastic. It sounds like a really exciting time for you and your team. So, Tim, if somebody wants to learn a little bit more about Planatome and yourself, how do we connect with you? Is there a website we can go to? Are you on LinkedIn? How do we learn more? Yeah. So you can go, we have our website, planatome.com. On there, there's a contact us space. So I think it's info@planatome.com. There's an email address. There's a phone number on there. For surgeons, there's also if they want to request samples, we can send samples out to them so they can try them out. Or hospitals, or any type of medical professional. And then on LinkedIn, Planatome has a page on LinkedIn. We actually also have one on YouTube, come to think of it. Not a lot on there yet, but it's coming. You'll see it coming. So there's the Planatome page on LinkedIn, and I have a personal page on LinkedIn, right? You can just feel free to reach out there.
Fantastic. Tim, first of all, I'd like to thank you and acknowledge you for the time it took to be our guru today. We appreciate all the insights that you brought to us.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to get this word out. I'm so confident this is going to have a major societal impact in so many different ways.
Yeah, I think it will. So good luck to you, and we'll be watching.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to MedTech Gurus. I am Sylvester Harris, your MC. If you want to learn more about Tom and his consulting services, you can go to www.pctmedical.com or email Tom at tom@pctmedical.com. Now, I can be reached at Sylvester Harris, that's SylvesterHarris 5048@gmail.com, and I'd be pleased to discuss any voiceover work that you may want for your company or broadcast. Hey, thanks so much for listening, and catch us on the next episode of MedTech Gurus.